Welcome everyone. Thank you for attending to our Zoom session in this evening. My name is İbrahim Polat Topcu. I'm a third year international relations student and also the vice president of Bilkent International Relations Society. And today, with my two colleagues, Aslısu Furtana and Aral Çağan Yurtseven, we will conduct a presentation on the expansion of BRICS. And for our event, have a very special guest, Robert O. Keohane. Please allow me to briefly introduce our guest to you. Robert O. Keohane is a prominent professor of international affairs. He is the author of After Hegemony, Cooperation and Discord in the World Political Economy, and Power and Governance in a Partially Globalized World. He is the co-author of Power and Interdependence and Designing Social Inquiry. He has served as the editor of the Journal International Organization and as president of the International Studies Association and the American Political Science Association. He won the Grawemeer Award for Ideas Improving World Order 1989 and the Joint Skype Prize in Political Science 2005. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Philosophical Society, and the National Academy of Sciences. Professor Keohane, thank you for meeting with us in this evening for us and in this morning for you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Now I would like to lay out the outline of our discussion here. As I mentioned, with my two colleagues, we will conduct a presentation. And after the presentation, Professor Keohane will provide his own arguments and his own feedback on our presentation here. And later, we can hold a Q&A session where you can ask your questions through chats, and I can ask them on the behalf of you as the moderator. Now, I think without further ado, we can start our presentation here. So the outline of our presentation is that I will provide a conceptual framework for us to think about BRICS, and Aslısu will talk about the recent expansion, and lastly, Çağan will mention the partner countries and the functions of BRICS+. So as an introduction, we can look at the members of BRICS+, where we see Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa as the founding members. And almost after 15 years, we see an expansion with the inclusion of Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and United Arab Emirates. Although that Saudi Arabia was invited to be a member as well, she declined that offer, and we ended up with a coalition of 9 countries. And as you can see on the right here, there are partner countries, which Çağan mentioned later, but I would like to indicate that Turkey is a partner country of BRICS+ at the moment. Now, the question that I will evaluate is, what is BRICS? What brought all of these distinct individual countries under the umbrella of BRICS? So the ontology of BRICS to many is that BRICS is an anti-democratic club. It's nothing more than just anti-democratic nations coming together. And the justification for that argument is that they are semi-anti-democratic countries and they were not included in the Western Cold War multilateral bloc, which means that they were never official NATO allies and they do not come from a liberal tradition, which makes them a threat to the democratic norms. On an individual level, when we look at them as individual nations, we see that. But to deepen our analysis, we offer to examine them as a group and ask the question, do they, as a group, act against democratic norms? And we see that they do not directly aim to undermine democratic norms, but they aim to do something else. And to find out that something else, looking at the joint statements that have been published since 2009 is a very efficient way. And then we look at here, you can see the first 4 joint statements that had been published, and a common narrative can be seen that the international financial system requires a very big reform, and that reform would be creating a more inclusionary and participatory, a more diversified international financial and monetary system. You can see that they want to, as BRICS countries, they want to have more larger and active roles, and they want more integrated and even-handed IMF to function in that system. And furthermore, when we look at the last 4 joint statements, we see that narrative has been going on for almost 15 years. They still want the participation of emerging markets and developing countries. And they want to use local currencies in order to take a stance against the US hegemony and US dollar. As you can see, these are the last forced joint statements. So although that's in this 15 year of time period, there were diversification on topics. They mention security, climate change, and even gender with the inclusion of women in finance. But the sharp focus has not been changed. It is finance. Therefore, understanding BRICS goes through finance. Here, we can lay out the conceptual framework, which is provided by Morse and Keohane in 2014. The authors provide contested multilateralism, which the concept claims that there is an already existing multilateral system, but the existing system does not satisfy some state and non-state actors. So these actors come together and build a coalition in order to challenge that status quo. So these newly emerging coalitions compete in order to shift the international institutional rules based on their own preferences. So the thing that we need to pay attention is that these coalitions are built around concrete topics. They are built around one concrete and focused topic. And BRICS is established upon financial issues. Although that another coalition could be built with the same parties of BRICS with another focus, just like undermining democratic norms, that coalition, that umbrella is not BRICS at the moment. BRICS is focused on finance. So to wrap everything that I've said so far, contested multilateralism process issue at the moment is the international financial and monetary system, and the challenged institutions are the IMF and the World Bank. And the challenging coalition to these institutions are the emerging markets and developing countries, which contains BRICS countries to be first. And the principal source of dissatisfaction is the lack of proper representation in the financial system. They claim that we want to be more included in the financial system. So they choose to focus on practices. In order to do that, they established a new institution, the New Development Bank, which works just like the World Bank, a multilateral and multinational development bank, which lends loans to developing countries on a very low interest rate. So all of these lead to the creation of a new regime complex where several institutional bodies in a multilateral manner works under one coalition. And here, therefore, we have the BRICS and the contested multilateralism. I now leave the word to Aslısu Furtana to talk about the expansion of BRICS.
Thank you, Polat, and thank you, Professor Keohane, for joining us today. I'm more than pleased to have you here. And in this part of the presentation, I will present arguments regarding BRICS in MENA region, which stands for Middle East and North Africa. I will also mention Turkey's application, challenges to the expansion, and what is the US approach to BRICS, and especially Trump's. So what will happen to BRICS expansion and how far they can go will be mentioned here. The reason why I will examine BRICS in MENA region is to point out the disparities in current BRICS Plus. So as you can see, and as Polat mentioned, Saudi Arabia is not a member. It rejected, but it was invited by BRICS. So it is vital to examine the reasons of the invitation and the potential reasons to the decline as well. So when it comes to Egypt and Ethiopia, these two members have historically had tensions and conflicts, but it has gotten worse recently, even though they've joined BRICS together for water resources because of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which could reduce water flow to Egypt and Sudan. But when it comes to the benefits that Egypt and Ethiopia bring to BRICS is to have wider access to African markets, which is really, really important, but also Ethiopia, for example, could benefit from BRICS in terms of having more flexible financial arrangements for a country that have historically struggled with debt. And maybe BRICS might not have a political goal in the region and to only have regional representation. But the question is, can it be achieved with the regional rivals and disparities such as Egypt and Ethiopia? And when it comes to Saudi Arabia and Iran, They are both oil-rich nations. However, they've often been in the opposite ends of the geopolitical spectrum. And benefits would be that they're both oil-rich nations, like we mentioned, and causing damage to the petrodollar system would benefit BRICS in terms of their goals a good amount. But when it comes to why Saudi Arabia rejected the invitation, many people tie this with the closeness to the US, which we will also talk about later on. Saudi Arabia and USA have been long-standing allies in terms of oil, terrorism, and security issues. And Saudi Arabia's opposition to Iran, which is a BRICS member at the moment, also aligns with the US interests. However, it is also important to maybe analyze the invitation maybe comes from China, and Saudi Arabia and China have had good relations because of the Belt and Road Initiative. And now I will talk about BRICS and Turkey's application to it. So coming from a Turkish university, I thought it would be beneficial to discuss Turkey's application. And one might argue that the surprising application, the unexpected application of Turkey is to prove West should not take Turkey for granted. However, Turkey got rejected and became a partner country, which Çağan will also mention, which shows the fact that Turkey is seen with distrust and suspicious from both West and the East at the moment. And also, it is important to say that why people think Turkey's application was surprising comes from the fact that Turkey is a member of Council of Europe and NATO as well. So mentioning NATO, I think we should also mention that this is from the response to US. Principal Deputy Spokesperson Patel said that this is an issue for Turkish partners to speak to. Turkey is an important and vital NATO ally. We can see some broad and now, when it comes to the challenges in a general sense, we can say that there are different interests of the members, and to some extent, they have different goals and outcome hopes from within the alliance. Egypt and Ethiopia might hope for actual development, financial development, but when it comes to Russia and China, they might have some security. Does not have a secretariat, they don't have a president, or they don't have a main building as well. And also, there are disparities among members, like we have mentioned, between Egypt and Ethiopia, and also maybe India and China as well. And the last part is no certain criteria for expansion, which Çağan will also mention, but they don't necessarily have a certain criteria for expansion. They don't specify it in the summits as well. And next, I will talk about the US response. This is a real of it, but there are certain points that I think were important. US mostly says that they will work hard to improve the bilateral relations with India and Brazil, for example. And they also emphasize the importance of liberal institutionalism by mentioning groups like APEC or G20. And we can pass to Trump's response now. When it comes to Trump's response, it was from a tweet, and this was sent while we were actually making the presentation. So Trump's response is very much harsher, and he definitely shut down the talks of BRICS currency and the allegations of more expansion by threatening to put 100 tariffs. And the tone of his tweet is also very much harsh. So we can say that in Trump administration, maybe BRICS expansion will be challenged. And this was all from me. I examined the current expansion and the member states. Now I will leave the floor to Çağan. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Aslı. And I will, in my part, I will try to find answers to two questions. One is the BRICS expansion and the possible further expansions and their nature. And the second question will be the which functions do BRICS possess, especially for its own members. So let's start with the expansion. And as we saw in Kazan Declaration in 2024, the BRICS had a gradual expansion with a new terminology of partner countries. So prior to these partner countries, new members were joined in 2023 Johannesburg Declaration, and also BRICS were previously, especially the host countries, were previously inviting their strategical and geologically close partners too, and these partners were called as Friends of BRICS in those previous summits. And now, in this year's summit, we saw a new terminology called partner countries. But as Aslısu said, this new terminology, partner country terminology, doesn't have a definitive definition. And during the declaration, there's only this emphasis regarding this EMDCs, emerging markets and developing countries. So as we look at the partner countries, Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Turkey, Vietnam, we can claim that these all fit to this definition, the emerging markets and developing countries. But apart from that, we can also argue that it is not much that these all countries share the same. By the way, the reason why Indonesia has a star near its application date is that it is one of the first countries among these partners to show their interest. So here we did a brief content analysis comparing two declarations, Kazan Declaration 2024 and the Johannesburg Second Declaration in 2023. So we choose some key terms regarding what BRICS focuses on most of its time, and these key terms are development. These key terms are development, finance, sustainability, economy, security, and multilateral. So the Kazan Declaration had 134 outcomes, and this marks the highest number of outcomes in the history of summit declarations of BRICS. So the emphasis on BRICS grows from year to year. We can argue that. And the Johannesburg Declaration had 94 outcomes. So to look at the key terms in both Kazan Declaration and the Johannesburg Declaration, we saw that all key terms have increased. However, some increased more and some increased less. Development is the most frequently used one. Well, no should be, right? But also the emphasis on security grows, especially with the Russia hosting the last summit. By the way, the mentioning of multilateralism, etc., is pretty low, but interestingly, BRICS group also uses the word cooperation rather than multilateralism. So, regarding the functions of the BRICS, it can be said that the BRICS grouping have some common aversions against the US hegemony. They might have some different claims in different foreign policy or different or international order, different claims regarding international order, as Aslısu mentioned, their differences and even their grievances. But the mismatch between distributed institutional power and actual power is the core argument what makes BRICS. So they are against the intervention in the name of humanitarian missions. They are against it. They all are the regional powers in their region, and they all have some grievances against the US hegemony in the international order. So, as Polat mentioned, that the most common issue in BRICS is global finance and development. However, we can also argue that there are some individual issues regarding the members, as, for example, China using BRICS as an instrument for its peaceful rise. current name is peaceful development. And Russia trying to gather some new allies in the age of its invasion to Ukraine, and India trying to seek a multi-alignment policy across both United States, Western liberal order, and also the emerging countries. So there is this taxonomy that Roberts et al. Uses in their book, the joiners, spoilers, and shirkers, which we found beneficial to look upon the matter. So they say that the joiner emerging countries and the ones that bury their distributional disputes, spoilers are the hardcore revisionists, and the free riders are the ones who accept the current hegemony until a new one emerges. So they also argue that BRICS is neither spoilers nor shirkers. Obviously, they're not joiners, but they're not also hardcore revisionists, and they're not also the free rider ones. So BRICS creates new institutions and pose regime complexity, as Polat argued, but also they are trying to find a way to reform the current international order, such as by conducting reforms in IMF and also the World Bank too. So a quick question emerges in this matter. So we thought that could the new expansion, partner countries, and also the possible expansion of BRICS will result in a free riding among new members of the BRICS, especially with the rise of China. They might become a free rider club too. So finally, we want to put an emphasis on the BRICS's function as a whole. So they are trying to change the US-led international order. However, they are also trying to distinguish UN Security Council, and international institutions that we also mentioned from the Western liberal order. So they are not wholly trying to create a new regime. They are also trying to infuse in this regime too. So they are low intensifying, delegitimizing the US-led hegemony, but also distinguishing the international institutions from it. This is our bibliography, and thank you for listening. So the QR is for the ones who want to get GE points, and also in order to evaluate our presentation, you can scan the QR. So now I'm leaving the floor for Polat for moderation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Çağan and Aslı, for this wonderful presentation. So may I ask Professor Keohane, what do you think about our presentation and our arguments?
I think your presentation is excellent, and I would emphasize several points that you made. This is a necessarily loose grouping, as you said, the BRICS grouping. There are lots of disparities among it. It's focused on finance as the only really substantive area where there is an emphasis. And it's the attempt to have a new regime complex, which does not include a forum, that does not include the US and the EU. There's not much operational, there's not much in the way of operational implications apart from the possible finance emphasis. And there can't be because there are too many disparities among the members. But it clearly serves the interests of all of these members to have a forum where they can discuss without the United States and the EU, as long as they can avoid dominance by Russia or China. And it seems that with the expansion of the BRICS, that's part of the agenda. I think your phrase from one of the people you quote, low intensity delegitimization of US dominance, is a good phrase. Now, I want to make a little contribution by putting this declaration and this institution into a historical context. So, if we think about the world since 1945, I would divide it into 5 phases, focused on who exercises the leadership and who is the central position. From 1945 to 1973, it was a system of clearly Western dominance. That's, of course, when Turkey joined NATO. It was Western and especially U.S. dominance. And the sub-theme in that period is the resistance of formerly colonized nations to Western dominance. And the big event there is the Bandung Declaration and Bandung Conference of 1955, which was the first sort of organized, vociferous attempt to go after colonialism, to end the colonial system, which still in 1955 covered a large part of the world. So that's the first phase of it, kind of Western dominance with the challenge to not to Western dominance, but to colonialism as a form of Western dominance. The second phase I would point to is 1973. I'm taking the oil crisis to 1989. And then you have the rise of an organized set of non-Western states, OPEC, which successfully challenges Western companies and Western states' dominance of the oil market and vastly increases oil prices, but also shifts the authority over the determination of oil flows to the producers from the consumers. And at the same time, in the same time period, 1973 to 89, you have the new international economic order, which you've probably read about. That is the move in the UN, led by developing countries, to grandly create a new international economic order that was fairer, that was anti-colonial in the broader sense, that is tried to redress the terms of trade and the economic relationships between the rich and the poor countries. Essentially, colonialism was gone, but the West and the U.S. in this period were still dominant. This is the frame within which After Hegemony was written. It was published in 1984. You get a reversion in a way in 1990. From 1990 to 2008, I would say there's renewed U.S. hegemony. The Soviet Union collapses. Russia becomes weak. The U.S. is unchallenged geopolitically. It follows the path of trying to control areas of the world which have lots of crisis and civil war, with UN peacekeeping and U.S. NATO peacekeeping in Bosnia. And in the former Yugoslavia in general. The kind of mark of this period is the U.S. bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, which either is an accident or just an expression of the United States dominance. I would date the post-hegemonic U.S. period, the post-U.S. hegemony period, to 2009, with the financial crisis, which starts in the United States, which is most severe in the United States, which weakens American economic power and also weakens belief that the United States can successfully manage the world economy. And this, of course, is the period not accidentally when the BRICS group is founded, 2008 to 2009. So this is 2008-9 is a real marker, is a real turning point in the control of the world economy. And I would say from 2016 on, you have a further multilateralization of the world economy, a further decline in U.S. Influence over it. the Kazan summit. I was reading some Council on Foreign Relations blog on the Kazan summit today, and it's characterized there as an unqualified success for Russia, as building options for building political and economic ties free of the United States guidance and mechanism, and it as a forum that is more successful in countering Western dominance than in forming a coherent leadership group. Nobody seems to think that Kazan and the BRICS have become a coherent leadership group. There are too many conflicts of interest between the members. Just think of India and China. But it is a marker of a common willingness to be able to take action, which is at forums which the United States is not involved in. And it's a common aspiration, at least, as the kind of alarmist Trump quote, which you have indicates, a kind of aspiration for diversification from over-reliance on the dollar. And certainly the Russians want to have that diversification. So it's a vehicle for partnership with the emerging market developing countries. So I think that your presentation has it right. I was just trying to put it in context of some broader history. It's a major shift, but it doesn't mean a coherent new organization which has a specific common agenda beyond loosening the constraints that they face from U.S. financial hegemony.
Thank you, Professor Keohane, for your kind comments on our presentation. I think we can now start the Q&A session where our participants can ask their question, and I will be asking them out loud.
Good.
And while waiting, I can actually ask a question on my own. So in the presentation, we mentioned that all of these BRICS plus countries do not come from a NATO background, a liberal background, a NATO background. But with Turkey being a partner country, this has changed. And what do you think about the general aspect of BRICS now? Do you think that it will invite other NATO allies and other countries that are very, very close to the United States?
What we don't know, what's buried in that question is what the future of NATO is with the Trump administration. Because for the first time since 1949, we'll have a president who has not supported NATO, and who, in fact, in this case, has explicitly attacked NATO and criticized it. And that's a little bit hard to interpret, because Trump's modus operandi, his way of operating, is to attack and then try to make a deal. That's what he did in his first term with North Korea. He tried with North Korea. That's what he did with China. So that's his way of operating, is to attack in order to get a stronger negotiating position, and then sometimes to negotiate a compromise. What's not clear about NATO right now, to me at least, is how serious Trump is about really pulling the U.S. out of NATO, which he's threatening to do, which would destroy it as we know it, or whether he is setting this up as a bargaining position to get more concessions from the Europeans. He certainly will get more concessions from the Europeans. They're taking it very seriously. But that's a little up in the air, how radical he'll be about getting rid of U.S. membership in NATO. If so, of course, that NATO is effectively destroyed or becomes a very different organization. The Europeans will have to look after their own defense, which will be difficult, but it's possible for them to do it. They certainly have the economic capacity. But we don't know yet how serious he is about actually carrying through on his threat.
Yes, it's a clear situation of uncertainty at the moment that we cannot anticipate what's going to come through this.
That's right. And the whole situation of Ukraine, which we haven't mentioned, is highly uncertain. There'll have to be a negotiation. It's clear that that war will not end with a victory from either side. So with a total victory, it'll be a negotiation which gives the Russians quite a bit. And the question is how soon and in what ways that negotiation will proceed, and how much it will give the Russians. And most important is that the Ukrainians need a credible guarantee that the attack by Russia won't be renewed in a year or 2 years, 5 years. And that credible guarantee is not on the horizon right now. It probably doesn't exist except with a strong US guarantee, and it's pretty clear Trump is not disposed to do that.
Thank you for your comment, and we have a question. So the question claims that given the economic and political disparities among BRICS members, does the group have the potential to act as one against the Western order? Can they
No.
counterweight?
No, the answer is no. And it's not designed to, really. So India has more conflicts of interest with China than with the United States, for example. So it's not going to act as one against the Western order. India and South Africa aspire to be part of the Western order and on better terms than they are now. So no, answer that question is clearly no.
Okay, thank you.
Not really part of the agenda.
So we see a diversification of the topics that are discussed within BRICS, although that the core still remains to be finance. Security has been mentioned lately a lot. So considering that both Russia and China being in the United States Security Council, do you think that those two countries could use their power in the Security Council in order to achieve more harmony and cooperation on security within BRICS?
No, because the power in the Security Council is principally negative. The Security Council is basically deadlocked on major issues because of the veto, and because Russia and China are aligned in most ways against the United States, Britain, and France. And so the Security Council is pretty much deadlocked on most important questions. The Middle East is sometimes an exception up to a point. But it's not going to develop a plan which the world would follow for international peace and security, because they're too divided.
Okay, thank you. And now, at the beginning of our session, you said that the current situation in Syria is very critical, and you would like to talk about that in
Yes, good.
We have a question regarding to that. So how does Syria's new situation will challenge the BRICS integration into the Middle East with the inclusion of different actors from Middle East into BRICS?
Well, I want to talk about Syrian collapse because these kinds of events drastically change the structure of world politics in this area, and they can lead to systemic shifts. So the most important thing to say, first, obviously, to say about the collapse of the Assad regime is that it's a serious blow to Russia and Iran, because they both put a lot of resources into this, and they put a lot of prestige into it, and their house of cards collapsed in 2 weeks. Now, that tells us something we already knew, but they had to learn for themselves. And the U.S. learned it in Vietnam, and learned it, and didn't really learn it fully enough, learned it in Iraq. Outsiders, no matter how powerful they are in general, have a very difficult time in this nationalist world controlling events in other countries. And the Russians and the Iranians discovered this week, that despite all their assets in Syria and their relationship with the regime, once the collapse took place, as in Vietnam in 1975, they were helpless. And so it reminds me of the famous, you've probably seen the famous photographs of people hanging onto helicopters leaving the U.S. Embassy in Saigon in 1975 when the U.S. left in disarray, and you experienced the U.S. leaving Afghanistan in disarray. Well, now we see it happening to the other side, but it's the same process. It's outsiders trying to prop up a regime which has lost the support of the public in the country. In the long run, that's not going to work. So that's a relearning lesson. But I wanted to compare this to other situations. Think back about the collapse of the East European satellites of the Soviet Union in 1989 to 1991. After East Germany opened its wall and collapsed, the whole bloc collapsed. So I think we should ask ourselves what the broader ramifications will be of the collapse of the Syrian regime in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon. And I think it'll also lead to an undermining of confidence in Russia and Iran. What's most intriguing to me is the opportunities it provides for Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. So you have now a situation in Syria with a number of different factions. It's not as if a unified opposition overthrew the Assad regime. Those factions will be at each other's throats, if they aren't already, very soon. The Saudis are close. They have lots of financial resources. They've been pretty conservative, even timid about their diplomacy in the past. So a big question is, will the Saudis, maybe in partnership with other Gulf states, maybe in competition with other Gulf states, try to actively intervene in Syria to exercise their influence? The analogies are, the other analogies I mentioned already are the U.S. collapse of influence in Iraq and the U.S. collapse of influence in Afghanistan. So I'm interested in what any of you think about this. What strategies do you expect from the Saudis and from the Gulf states, or from Iran? Would Russia simply back off, or will they somehow try to revive their influence in Syria? Do you have perceptions, views about that?
I can comment on the Russia issue because if Russia leaves the place, then there would be a huge gap of power in the region. But I believe it has to leave the region because this war in Ukraine has been going on for so long, and just Russia has been putting a lot of resources there and also losing their own, I would say, place in the international domain through putting that much effort into the invasion of Ukraine. So they cannot be at two places at once with Syria being this crowded at the moment. So they will probably have to retrieve, but to be precise, I do not have certain ideas about what the Saudi Arabian Gulf countries would be. Maybe Çağan would provide an argument here.
So, well, since the fall of the Assad regime, I mainly try to look upon the news regarding what would Israel do. So now we can argue that the Syrian president is terribly damaged because the Assad regime have fallen. Haçlı Şabi militias are not will not be prominent in Syria, and etc. And Iran won't be able to supply Hezbollah. So the Israeli aspect is that they are pretty optimistic and pretty happy regarding the situation in Syria. But in case of the Gulf countries, I believe the matter is a bit complicated. We know that during the Arab Spring, they have supported the Ikhwan movements across the several Arab countries, and they mostly have parted their ways with Assad during the Syrian civil war. But as far as I remember, in 2023, the Arab League re-invited Assad to start talks with him. So the paradigm was shifting at that point, but also now we have an whole different theater in our hands. So I believe the regime change and the change in the political situation of Syria will have damaged the Gulf's ideas regarding Middle East, because most of them were trying to find a way between supporting both the Gaza, the Muslimhood cause, and also they're trying to find a way to deal with their relation with Israel. So now the Syria have fallen and a new regime will occur, and we also don't know how the Hayat Tahrir Sham will focus on the Golan Heights and the relations with Israel. So they basically have a Pandora's box in their hands right now, I believe.
Okay, good. Well, I think that I agree about Russia. I take it the view is that Russia is overextended. I think they're overcommitted, and they don't have many options, so they'll probably just play a lesser role. I think your comments about the Saudis, it's uncertain because they have much greater capacity than Russia in the area, but they've been very cautious. And the situation with all the various contenders is complex. I'm no expert on Saudi Arabia, but I think that's the country to watch to see which way they go. Iran is weakened by the defeat of Hezbollah by the Israelis, as well as by this pullout, and they have a regime which has had obviously their leadership now has even before this had very serious second thoughts about Iranian aggressiveness. On the other hand, they're speeding up their nuclear ambitions. So I wouldn't be surprised if Iran, on the one hand, became a nuclear state explicitly, and on the other hand, became somewhat less expansionist in its region. Because one way to protect the regime from attack would, of course, to have nuclear weapons, but not be actively engaged in threatening anybody else. In that case, you'd be like a number of countries that have nuclear weapons but are not themselves engaged in conflict.
Well, thank you for that lovely conversation about the current crisis in Syria. It was really important to mention those for today's agenda. And now I have a question on my own based on the comments that you made after our presentation. It is on BRICS again, so that you claimed that there are 5 phases after the Second World War, and you started the second phase with the OPEC oil crisis, saying that the OPEC countries was the first to challenge the status quo of the Western led order. Now that we also see the expansion occurred with the MENA region, with the inclusion of MENA region countries. So although that we have not seen a pattern, a consistent pattern on BRICS' expansion, can we say that BRICS looks at the historical content and say that, oh yes, these countries at the time really created a problem for the Western powers, so their inclusion into our coalition would be wise?
Well, I'm a little bit puzzled by the expansion to Egypt and Ethiopia, which have themselves conflicts. And Iran and the United Arab Emirates, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, tell me first, what did Saudi Arabia say in response to the invitation? They haven't accepted it, but have they turned it down, or are they just still saying they're considering it?
Uh, well, Aslısu can provide an argument on that because it was her part.
Yeah. So basically, there are disparities within the newspapers as well. Some cover that Saudi Arabia have rejected the offer, and some cover that Saudi Arabia is still discussing to join. So there are two types of news as well, and that, as far as I've researched.
Okay, so it's a little bit ambiguous whether they've actually turned it down or just not accepted it. It would be a little surprising if they accepted it, given their close ties with the United States. So, I mean, if I were running Saudi policy, I probably would also be ambiguous. I wouldn't accept it, but I probably wouldn't reject it. I'd say, well, let's consider that. We'll remain in good relationships with you and think about being a member. Keeping their options open. Of course, a lot depends on how the BRICS expand. If they really, if they expand in the direction of Algeria, Belarus, Bolivia, and Cuba, then they're moving toward the Russian side. If they expand, and also Kazakhstan, if they expand in the direction of Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, and Turkey, that's a very different story. Vietnam. So on the list of possible partner nations, you have clear allies of the Chinese and sometimes the Russians, as in Cuba, and you have Vietnam, which is a clear opponent of China. So it looks like a compromised list. That is, that there are some candidates that the Russians wanted, Chinese wanted, and there are some candidates that the Indians and South Africans probably wanted. And it'll be really interesting to see to what extent the BRIC organization is shaped by decisions, not by its decisions, because it made a compromise. It's sort of laundry list. Okay, we'll invite all of you. But the decisions of potential partner nations. And of course, they will have to worry about Trump and to see how U.S. relations would be affected if they join, and that probably inhibits some of the pro U.S. countries. It might be that Trump's election tips the BRICS toward the Russian side if it turns out that the countries that have a prospect of good relations with the U.S. or decent relations with the U.S. are discouraged or dissuaded from joining, and the countries that have no prospects for and don't want strong relations with the U.S., the Bolivias, Cubas, Belaruses, do join.
Well, thank you. That was actually put in a more great manner than our presentation did. And I think that now we are close to 1 hour with our Zoom session here. One last question to wrap up some of the questions that has been texted in the chat would be appropriate. To close our discussion here, we need to mention the election of Trump, re-election of Trump, with him saying that U.S. will no longer be the global police force of the earth. And all of these countries, these BRICS plus countries, came together with some common aversions regarding to the Western US-led order. But now United States does not want to take that role into further. So what do we have when we talk about BRICS? If United States and the Western-led order no more tries to pursue a global career, a global role. So do they just, abolish itself? The BRICS, would it abolish itself or take things into further than financial manners and build another cooperative organization under the umbrella?
There's no reason for them to abolish themselves because they've been modestly successful, and there has been no. I don't see any negative feedback to the leading members of BRICS. They have benefited from greater prominence and from having greater coherence as a group. And none of them has sort of given up its autonomy or sacrificed any of its major interests. So I don't think they will dissolve. I think that the big question is what's going to happen in a world of global disorder, because we'll still, if the U.S. pulls back from its global, was already pulling back from its global policeman role, and with Trump much more so, there will be situations that arise, and Syria is the most recent one, where there are serious conflicts that erupt in violence, and that, as in the Syrian case, with Turkey and Israel both taking measures in response to the Syrian revolutionary situation, for international conflict arising. And then the question is, with a paralyzed UN and no U.S. hegemony, what's gonna contain the conflict? Or we're just gonna have many more conflicts which sputter on and play themselves out over time. So if you imagine something like the Yugoslav Civil War happening now with no U.S. to butt heads together, that could have led to a long-standing civil war, and which probably wouldn't have, but might have brought in outside powers. It'll be a world of greater conflict and greater anarchy.
Okay, thank you. If no more questions we have, then thank you very much for your time. It was a great session with you. I hope our presentation was helpful for our audience to understand the topic as well. And thank you for coming.
It was very good. Thank you for inviting me. And it reminds me of the old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. You live in interesting times.
Indeed, we do.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice day, Professor Keohane.
Have a good day, sir.
Have a
Same
good
to
day.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.